6 months of carefully maintained distance shattered the moment I stepped into the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. The architecture firm had been explicit that my presence tonight was not optional. The launch of the Easton Green Towers project my design. My return after the divorce required the architect herself to stand and represent it. I walked in wearing a charcoal gray cocktail dress with delicate pleats meant to distract the eye, holding my clutch like a shield, praying no one would notice the unmistakable curve of my 5th-month pregnancy beginning to push forward beneath the fabric. The room shimmered with the glittering lights of Manhattan's elite media moguls, politicians, old dynastic families, each face a reminder of how far I had gone, and how much farther I needed to go if I ever hoped to outrun my past. And then, amid the noise and the mirrored sparkle of crystal glasses, I felt it a jolt, the electric sting of recognition. I turned my head. Liam Callahan. His name was not on the guest list, but of course, men like him did not need invitations. They arrived when they wished. Our eyes met. 6 months of silence cracked open in a single glance. I had buried the past. But the past always finds its own way back, especially when it has no idea that I am carrying its child. I drew a long breath as the stage lights swept across the platform ahead, trying to steady my legs beneath the soft fabric of my heels. Marcus appeared at my side, his hand pressed gently to my back, a silent reminder that time was running short. "Are you all right?" he murmured, his gaze flicking over the rapidly filling room. I nodded, my voice holding the calm I had practiced for weeks. "I'm fine, just a little nervous." Nothing inside me felt fine. My heartbeat pounded like a war drum beneath the tightening fabric of my dress, rising with every movement. Liam's gaze clung to me like a shadow even though he was no longer in sight. I knew he was there, somewhere under those chandeliers and the muted clinking of crystal. He had seen me, and I had seen his eyes, not the distant stare from the day we signed the divorce papers in a cold, sterile courtroom, but something else entirely, something deeper, unsettled. When the program coordinator spoke my name into the microphone, the room quieted as if every whisper folded into the same breath. I walked into the light, wearing the practiced professional smile, spine straight, chin lifted, clutching the presentation remote as though it were the only weapon I needed to protect myself. The first slide illuminated behind me, the architectural cross-section of Easton Green Towers. My voice carried evenly, each word measured, outlining ideas of sustainability and energy efficiency. I looked down into the crowd and saw him. Liam stood near the bar, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand, his gaze locked onto me without a single blink. There was something in that look that made me want to turn away, but also kept me exactly where I was. The room warmed, and sweat gathered softly beneath the satin, the harsh stage lights burning against my back. I turned to the left to point at the modeled rainwater reuse system integrated into the building's frame, and in that moment, something shifted. The humid air from the storm outside drifted into the ballroom, carrying a thin mist that clung to the dress at my abdomen. A faint breeze from the rear doors brushed across me, barely enough for anyone else to notice, but more than enough to draw the fabric tightly against my lower belly like an unexpected touch. I felt the small movement inside me, the baby turning as if to offer its own quiet, merciless warning. I tugged the dress down with a calculated gesture meant to appear natural, but the stage lights were far less forgiving than the soft mirrors of a dressing room. I did not need to look to know my stomach was no longer hidden, and then I saw it in his eyes. Liam had noticed. He did not speak. He did not frown or widen his eyes or make any theatrical show of surprise. It was subtler than that surprise first, sliding into suspicion, then sharpening into a chilling focus. He leaned forward slightly, ignoring the man speaking beside him, the whiskey in his hand forgotten. I knew exactly what that meant. He was calculating, piecing together shards of a truth that should have been impossible but was now standing in front of him beneath the brightest lights in the room. I turned away, continuing my presentation though every word felt heavy, dragged through a storm inside my chest. I finished as if the speech were the only thing anchoring me to the ground. When the applause broke, I bowed under the hot lights, with breath lodged tightly in my throat, and I knew that the moment I stepped off that stage, nothing would ever be the same again. If you are listening to this and something in the story touches a corner of your heart, take 1 second to subscribe to our channel, like and share this video so we have the strength to continue bringing you emotional stories every day. And if you don't mind, would you tell me where you are watching from? Leave a comment below and let us know what corner of the world this story has reached. We treasure every single word you share with us. I left the stage with legs that felt as heavy as if each step were sinking into the marble floor. The applause behind me faded into something distant as I slipped backstage, gripping the rail of the hallway like someone trying to hold on to something invisible. I wanted only to go home, peel out of this shell, loosen the dress that had been strangling the truth I had hidden for 5 long months. But before I reached the emergency exit leading to the parking garage, his voice rose behind me, rough, low, a blade sliding straight between my ribs. "Ava." I stopped, but I did not turn. My breath grew heavier as I heard his footsteps approaching, each click of leather echoing down the empty corridor. When I finally turned, Liam stood there less than an arm's length away, his eyes no longer questioning but certain. He looked at me as though he could see straight through the fabric, through the careful armor I had built over the past 6 months, straight into the most vulnerable place within me. "How long?" His voice was deep and steady, but fire simmered beneath it. I pressed my lips together, clinging to the last thread of control. "I don't know what you're talking about." Liam raised a brow and stepped closer. "Don't do that, Ava." I saw everything. I'm not an idiot. I stepped back, clutching the purse tighter as if it could shield me from him. "I just want to leave, Liam. We have nothing to talk about." He shook his head and laughed softly, though there was no humor in the sound. "Nothing to talk about? You stood on that stage, visibly pregnant, and you think I wouldn't ask?" My fingers tightened around the strap until my nails marked my skin. "This is none of your business." He looked at me for a long moment, considering, then lowered his voice, more urgent now. "Is it mine?" I lifted my head, meeting those deep brown eyes filled with emotion, an unsettling mix of hope and fear. I wanted to tell the truth. I wanted to step into him and say, "Yes, it is yours," that I had walked through everything alone with nothing but the memory of the man who once said he loved me, but walked away when he believed I could never give him a child. But instead, I shook my head. "No, it's not." He stepped back as though the blow had landed square in his chest. A heavy silence settled over us. His jaw tightened, his lips pressed thin. "You're lying." I swallowed hard. "You don't get to know everything about my life anymore. We're divorced, Liam." He closed his eyes for a brief second, breathing in deeply as if to steady himself. 6 months. 6 months of nothing, and now you show up, pregnant, and expect me to believe you found someone right after we ended? Maybe. The world doesn't revolve around what you think is reasonable. His eyes darkened. "You know me. You know I'm not going to accept that." I exhaled a brittle laugh. "That sounds like your problem, not mine." I walked past him, my shoulder brushing his arm, tense, as though he were ready to reach for me but choosing not to. I felt his gaze on my back as I pushed open the cold metal door, the night wind slicing across my skin like a warning. I did not dare look back. I did not want to know whether he was still standing there waiting for me to turn around, or whether he had already walked away just as he did the last time I saw him outside the courtroom. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The silence of the past 6 months had been broken, and there was no way to stitch it back together. The sharp rhythm of my heels struck the hallway leading toward the parking garage, yet the echo behind me clung to my back, reverberating like a warning bell I could not silence. Liam called my name again, his voice low, firm, and urgent. I stopped, turning quickly with every ounce of exhaustion and anger I had swallowed, my gaze sweeping across his face under the dim amber light of the service corridor, where shadows and illumination intertwined like the secrets I had hidden far too long. "What else do you want, Liam? I already answered you." He stepped closer, his eyes locked onto mine, anger simmering beneath a disciplined exterior. He did not believe me, never had, and this time was no different. "You didn't look me in the eye when you said it, because you don't have the right. You signed the divorce papers, remember? That was your choice." My voice caught despite my effort to steady it. Liam drew a deep breath, his fingers curling briefly into a fist before loosening again. "You're 5 months pregnant, Ava. 6 months ago we were still married." He counted the months in his head. "You think I wouldn't do that math?" He looked at me as if waiting for me to break apart, and I nearly did. Something inside my chest cracked, like a pane of glass splintering under too much pressure. I couldn't take another second of this. I was exhausted from lying. I dropped my gaze from his, inhaled deeply, and spoke softly but clearly. "Yes, it's yours." Liam froze, as if those words had shoved him out of reality. His eyes widened, his chest rising and falling with stunned breaths. He said nothing at first, only stared at me as though trying to detect a flaw, a weakness, a hole in the truth I had just given him. I didn't know what I expected, maybe anger, maybe joy, maybe collapse. But when he stepped forward, his voice was neither raised nor chaotic. It was low and firm. "We'll do a test." I frowned. "For what?" "I just told you." He shook his head, each word emerging tight with strain. "I need to be certain. And once I know, I won't step back." I had known Liam long enough to understand this was not an empty threat. He would do whatever it took to force his way into this situation. I turned away, my fingers squeezing the strap of my purse until they went numb. "Do what you want. I don't care." But his eyes told me he cared more than he ever had before. A cold draft swept through the still open metal door behind me, sliding beneath the thin fabric against my skin. In that fleeting moment, old memories surged like a rising tide. I saw myself in the doctor's office, my hand icy as it gripped the edge of my coat while I listened to words like infertility, ovarian failure, and near zero possibility. I remembered Liam's face as we walked out of that appointment. Silence, emptiness, no embrace, no comfort. Only distance growing between us like a wall neither of us dared to dismantle. Then the conversation in the kitchen, when he told me he needed time. I asked how long. He never answered. And one day, he came home with divorce papers, saying things would be easier if we ended things gracefully. I signed, not because I wanted to, but because I was too worn out to fight someone who had already left me long before he walked out the door. 6 months later, I had a child the doctors swore I could not conceive. Bitter, cruel, and now here he stood demanding the right to know, to be involved, to be a father. I looked at Liam and saw his eyes flicker with something caught between fury and regret, and I wondered whether anything between us could ever be salvaged. But in that moment, the only thing I knew to do was turn away and keep walking. Running, perhaps, but running was the only form of protection I had left for myself and for the child growing inside me. 3 days passed in silence. No messages, no calls, no words from Liam since the night he demanded a DNA test, and I reluctantly agreed. I wasn't sure if he was respecting the distance I drew or fighting his own turmoil, but it did nothing to lighten the weight of the silence. In my small apartment filled with morning light, I curled into the armchair by the window, resting a hand on my belly as if to find something steady in the gentle stirrings within me. The baby moved more often now, soft reminders that I was no longer alone. Yet I had never felt so isolated. I turned off my phone, muted every notification, shut myself off from anything that could tie me back to the world outside, especially to Liam. I didn't want to hear his voice, didn't want to see his name appear on my screen, because I didn't know how I would react if he reached out, and I didn't know what I would do if he didn't. I was 5 months pregnant. It was real in ways I could feel every day, the heavier breaths when climbing stairs, the restless nights because sleep had become fragile. But everything had begun in a moment no one could have predicted. I remembered that morning vividly. A foggy spring morning, 2 weeks after Liam left. I was standing in the bathroom, my hands trembling as 2 pink lines slowly appeared on the test. I stared at it, half hoping it would disappear, not because I didn't want a child, but because I had trained myself not to hope. After so many single-line tests, disappointment had become familiar. But this time was different. I rested a hand over my abdomen without knowing why. It was still flat then, unchanged. But deep inside, I already knew. I burst into tears, not from joy, not entirely from sorrow, but from the cruel paradox of it all. On the day I lost my husband, I discovered I was carrying his child. I didn't call Liam, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I didn't think he would believe me. The Liam of that time was not the man who once held my hand at night and whispered dreams of a house filled with the sound of children. He was the man who looked at me as if I were something broken and chose to step back when I needed him most. I thought I would never tell him. I would raise the child alone, work, live quietly, let the past drift like something that had happened but no longer mattered. But fate has its own methods. I could not have predicted the gala, the stage lights, my own body betraying me in the most public way possible. And now, I waited for the test results, waited for Liam's reaction. Waited for something, some sign that I was not entirely alone in this story. But I also knew that if the test confirmed he was the father, everything would change. Not just legally, not just in responsibility, but inside my heart, where I had spent 6 months burying him. I closed my eyes, listening to my heartbeat under the soft hum of jazz from the radio, and for the first time in 3 days, I wondered, if he came back, would I let him in, or would I push him away again? On the 3rd afternoon, a thin envelope lay in the mailbox outside my apartment. No sender's name, only a printed address, cold, official, carrying the weight of something irreversible. I knew what it was. For a moment, I considered leaving it on the kitchen counter and walking away as if I hadn't seen it, but somehow my hands had already opened it, pulling out the papers that trembled between my fingers. The words were plain, clinical, emotionless, yet enough to stop my heart for a long beat. Liam Callahan, probability of biological relation to the fetus, nearly 100%. I didn't know what else I expected, but seeing it written, printed, formal, no longer suspicion or intuition, but a truth stamped in black and white felt like something tightening around my lungs. I didn't even have time to decide what to do with the papers before the doorbell rang. Liam. He stood on the threshold, posture straight, eyes fixed on me. "I know," I said before he could speak. He nodded. "So you read it?" "Yes. You weren't going to tell him, were you?" His question held no accusation, yet carried something heavier. I folded my arms, building a fragile barrier I knew could shatter at the slightest touch. I was going to raise this baby alone. Liam stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. He made a slow circle around the apartment as if committing every detail to memory, then turned back to me, his voice steady. "Ava, I'm not letting that happen. This child is mine. I have a right." I flinched. "A right? That's the word you use for your own child? This isn't a court case, Liam. This is life. This is emotion. This is responsibility you abandoned long before it ever began." He moved closer, his eyes burning with conviction. "I didn't abandon anything. I didn't know. You never gave me the chance." I let out a brittle laugh, stepping back. "A chance? After you signed the divorce papers and told me you couldn't stay married to someone who couldn't give you a child? What exactly do you think I should have done when I found out I was pregnant afterward? Run to you with the news so you could come back like some savior?" Liam's jaw tightened, his expression darkening. "I'm not a savior, but I am the father, and I have the right to be in my child's life." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. In the past 3 days, I had imagined countless scenarios, countless conversations, even apologies, but never a thinly veiled threat about paternal rights. I lowered my voice, the words hard as stone. "What are you planning to do, Liam? Sue me? Drag me to court? Fight for custody against a woman 5 months pregnant because your ego is bruised?" His face hardened. He didn't speak immediately, but his eyes told me he was considering it, truly considering it, and that hurt more than when he left me the first time, because now he wasn't returning to love or atone, but to fight. I stepped forward and shoved a hand against his chest. "You don't get to turn this into a war. This baby is not a weapon for you to reclaim what you think you lost." He didn't answer. He only stood there, eyes locked on mine, jaw clenched. No longer the man I once loved, but someone else entirely carrying shadows, pressure, and a twisted remorse he couldn't articulate. I spoke one last time before turning away, my voice no longer trembling. "If you want to fight, Liam, then fight. But remember this. I forgave you once. I will not do it again." The door closed behind him in silence, but in my heart, the sound rang like shattering glass, sharp, final, impossible to mend. After Liam left, I remained frozen on the sofa for hours, my hand clenched around the folder of test results, as though if I loosened my grip, everything else would collapse along with it. The bitterness lingered in my throat, but beneath the anger was another discomfort, quieter and more persistent. A question had hovered at the edges of my mind since the day I discovered I was pregnant, a question I had avoided by burying it under hundreds of reasons and thousands of fears. How could I be pregnant when the doctors once told me I could not be? They had not used the word hope. They had said it flatly, unequivocally. Impossible. No need for further tests. I remembered that day, the dull afternoon light filtering through the clinic window, the doctor's dry voice reading like a sentence. I felt myself shatter into tiny pieces. Liam had been silent. Only much later did I understand that his silence was retreat. And then came the divorce papers. We never spoke about children again. I stood, opened the filing cabinet, and pulled out the old box I had shoved deep into the drawer the day I moved out of our shared apartment. Old documents were mixed with a few wedding photos, appointment cards, and payment receipts. I pulled out the clinical records papers I had shoved blindly into the box on the day I left, too heartbroken to ever look at them again until now. I spread everything across the table, marking dates, blood tests, hormone panels, ultrasound results, and then I saw it. A hormone panel printed in early April, just days after our initial appointment, showing estrogen levels extremely low, nearly non-responsive. But below it was another blood test ordered by my personal physician from a different clinic during that same month, just 2 weeks earlier, with estrogen levels completely normal. I frowned. How could two results less than 14 days apart differ so drastically? I combed through the records again, noting every date, comparing appointment times with the hormone injections they once tried. An HCG shot appeared in the chart, but not in the payment invoice. A follow-up appointment had been canceled without any notification to me. Each small detail formed a hairline crack in what I had once believed to be unquestionable truth. Something was wrong. I sat up straight, my heartbeat thudding hard in my chest, a chill settling deep into my bones as the thought became clearer. Had I been led to believe exactly what someone wanted me to believe? A misdiagnosis? Or worse, manipulation? I remembered the uncomfortable look in the doctor's eyes the day she delivered the results, the way she avoided meeting my gaze, as though she were reading from a script. I had once assumed it was because I was too fragile. Now I wasn't sure. I searched the doctor's name online, digging through her credentials, complaint history, clinic affiliations. One link stood out. The clinic belonged to a private medical service chain controlled by an investment fund, a fund with a familiar name on its board. Margaret Callahan. I went still. Margaret Callahan, Liam's mother. The woman who was always polite to me yet never hid her disapproval of my marriage to her son. The woman who once smiled and told me I was a good girl but far too ordinary for a family like theirs. The woman who spoke constantly of legacy, reputation, and above all, producing an heir. My chest tightened. This was no longer suspicion. Something deep in me had known this for a long time, but I had never dared to name it. Now the truth sat before me, undeniable as the midday sun. Someone had wanted me to believe I could not have a child, and I had believed it. I looked down at my stomach where the baby moved softly, a living contradiction to the lie that had shaped my life for so long. I rested my hand over the fabric, the voice in my mind rising like a quiet vow. I will find the truth, no matter where it leads. I sat in my home office, the glow of my laptop screen casting a pale reflection across my face. Margaret Callahan's name sat prominently on the management page of the healthcare investment fund, directly linked to the chain of clinics where I had been diagnosed as infertile. No more speculation, no more doubt. Every dot connected into a single, unbroken line, and it pointed straight to my former mother-in-law, the woman who always maintained a courteous, polished demeanor, who shook hands softly and smiled at the appropriate moments, but who had never accepted me as a permanent member of their family. I remembered the tense dinners in her mansion, where every question revolved around my work, why after 2 years I still had no children, whether anyone in my family had struggled with fertility, all wrapped in the guise of concern but fueled by scrutiny. I remembered the chill that ran through me when she placed a hand on my shoulder once, when we were briefly alone, and said quietly that women could love, could be beautiful, could be successful, but giving birth was what made them irreplaceable. I had dismissed it then as old-fashioned thinking, but now there was no doubt left. I grabbed my phone, dialing Liam before my rational mind could stop me. He answered after only a few rings, his voice rough, as if he had not slept. "Ava, what's wrong?" I didn't waste time. "I need to see you. It's urgent." 30 minutes later, we sat across from each other in a small cafe near the park. I placed the folder of printed documents in front of him, every link, every legal file, every smallest piece of evidence. Liam read silently, his brows knitting deeper with every page. The wind outside shook the light across the wooden table, but his expression hardened like stone. When he reached the last page, he raised his head, his eyes dark with controlled fury. "You think my mother did this? It's not what I think. It's what she did. It's all right there." He pushed his chair back and stood. "I'm going to ask her, directly." And for the first time in months, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't regret. It was fire. It was betrayal. It was something inside him snapping. I didn't go with him. I wanted him to face this truth alone without me translating, smoothing edges, or mediating. An hour later, Liam stood in his mother's office, on the top floor of the Callahan Group building, the place that once symbolized their family's legacy. Margaret Callahan lifted her gaze from her papers, her expression composed as always. "You came without calling. What's going on, Liam?" He placed the folder on her desk and opened it to the first page. "Read it." She glanced through, needing less than 2 minutes to understand exactly what she was facing. Her eyes did not change, but her fingers curled slightly. Her voice remained calm. "I did it for you, for your future, for this family." Liam stepped back as though struck. "Do you know you destroyed my life? Destroyed my marriage? Destroyed a woman's belief in her own body?" Margaret sighed, rising to adjust her collar. "Ava was not suitable. You were too blinded to see that. She had no pedigree, no status, nothing that could preserve the Callahan legacy. But you were wrong. Liam slammed his hand on the desk. I loved her, and I will never forgive you for this. Margaret moved closer, her voice cutting colder. You will thank me one day. That child is an accident, but now it is an opportunity for you to start over, this time with someone more appropriate. Liam stared at her as if seeing a stranger. I will protect Ava and my child, even if I have to walk away from this family forever. He left the office without looking back. Outside, the rain had begun to fall, each drop streaking down the glass as if trying to erase what had just happened, but nothing could erase it. The cracks inside him had begun on the day Ava left, and now they had spread all the way to the foundation of the place he once believed was home. That evening, the rain still hadn't stopped, soft droplets tapping against the window frame as I sat curled on the sofa, holding a thin blanket around me like a makeshift shield against the exhaustion wearing down every nerve in my body. I hadn't slept well in 2 nights. From the moment I discovered Liam's mother had interfered, to the moment Liam confronted her, everything inside me felt uprooted again. Pain, hurt, but tangled somewhere beneath was something else. Something softer, more fragile. Something still trying not to believe it had all been orchestrated. Then came the knock at the door. Not loud, not urgent, just 3 steady taps. Deliberate, as if the person knocking knew I was inside. Listening, hesitating, I stepped forward, pausing only a second before opening it. Liam stood there, his coat dark with rain, the hallway light casting a dim glow over his face, revealing every trace of exhaustion he didn't bother hiding. He didn't speak. We simply looked at each other in silence. Finally, I stepped aside to let him in. He took off his coat and stood in the living room like a stranger returning to a place that once belonged to him. He didn't sit, didn't take off his shoes. He simply stood there, his fingers knotted together, his eyes holding something old and familiar, but stripped of the pride that once accompanied it. He spoke first. My mother admitted it. I asked her directly, and she didn't deny any of it. I nodded, not surprised, but still wounded. So every instinct I had, every fear they called irrational, all of it was real. Liam continued, his voice low but clear. I believed too much in expectations, so much that I forgot who was most important to me. I don't have excuses. I have one truth. I was wrong. I looked at him with the eyes of someone who had been wounded deeply and was not ready to soften simply because he finally arrived with remorse. Do you know how much I hated myself, Liam? How much I believed I wasn't enough? Not enough to be a wife. Not enough to be a mother. For 6 months I lived with the fear that I would never deserve happiness. Every time the baby moved, I felt a miracle wrapped in guilt, because I had surrendered all my faith based on someone else's conclusion. And now you're here, saying you were wrong, that you regret everything. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. He stepped closer, not pressing, not demanding, resting one hand lightly on the back of the sofa, keeping just enough distance so I wouldn't step back. He knew he couldn't fix everything in a single night. He only asked to start again, from anywhere I allowed. Not out of obligation. Not because the baby is his blood, but because he still loved me. Because he had never stopped. My heart tightened between 2 opposing tides. The hurt in me wanted to push him away, but another part, the part that once knew happiness beside him, wanted to believe we might find it again someday. I didn't answer right away. I stepped closer, placing a hand on my belly, feeling the warm stir of the child inside. Then I lifted my gaze to meet his. I can't forgive you now, but I won't shut you out of this child's life. You need to prove something not just to me, but to yourself. Liam nodded, as though he'd been waiting his entire life to hear those words. However long it takes. Ava, I'll wait. However long. When he left, the door closed gently behind him, no longer the sharp slam that belonged to our past. And though the rain still fell outside, I could feel the ground beneath my feet shifting, no longer a place shattered beyond repair, but an open space waiting to be rebuilt. From the beginning, the cold arrived faster than I expected. Early winter mornings leaving a thin layer of frost across the apartment windows where I woke each day with my hand resting on my belly, a habit born from months of loneliness. But lately, something had changed. The steady calls from Liam, not intrusive, never demanding, simply asking what I'd eaten, whether I'd slept, whether I needed anything, short messages wishing me good night, or a photo of the construction site where he'd incorporated an idea I once mentioned. He wasn't trying to force his way back into my life. Instead, he stood there quietly, patiently, as though laying down bricks for something neither of us dared name yet. Then that afternoon, He called without warning, offering a simple invitation. Just see me for a moment. If you're uncomfortable, I'll leave. I hesitated, but went. We met in the same cafe we used to visit when we first dated. Nothing had changed: the soft yellow lights, the smell of fresh pastries, the faint jazz drifting from a small speaker on the wall. Liam arrived early as usual, but this time he didn't rest his hand on the back of the chair waiting for me, didn't search the door like a man afraid of being abandoned. He simply sat with his hands clasped on the table, his expression calm, as if ready for any answer. "Are you well?" I nodded, ordered warm tea, and sat across from him. He didn't circle around his point. He said he didn't only want to be in his child's life. He wanted to be in mine, not out of guilt, not because he felt obligated, but because of love, because the feeling had lived in him from the first moment we met until now, despite everything that had changed, despite the fact that he was the one who pushed me away. I stayed silent, watching the raindrops slide down the window, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to believe him. Part of me stood guard, carrying hundreds of unanswered questions. If I weren't pregnant, if the baby didn't exist, would you have come back? He looked at me for a long time before answering slowly. Yes, but maybe not fast enough, not brave enough. The baby wasn't the reason. The baby was what made me realize I had lost the most important thing in my life. You. A quiet shiver went through me. The truth has a way of softening even the hardest places. But I had loved him once without leaving anything for myself, and I had shattered. How could I know this time would be different? He didn't make promises. He only said he would prove it every day, in the smallest ways, that he was no longer the man he once was, that he wasn't coming to rescue me, but to walk beside me, that if I allowed it, he wanted us to begin again, not as who we used to be, but as two new people who carried our past without letting it dictate what came next. I didn't answer immediately. I looked at him, at the hands that once held mine as we read our wedding vows, at the eyes that had once gone cold but now held a tenderness almost painful in its honesty. I knew I still loved him. Love doesn't disappear just because someone breaks you. It simply steps back and waits for a reason to return. But forgiveness is not an act, it is a journey, and I was still taking slow steps along that road. He asked if he could wait for me, not as the father of the child, but simply as Liam, the man who once loved Ava Mitchell and still loved her now. I looked into his eyes and, for the first time, didn't step away. I don't know what the future looks like, but if there's a chance, just one, to try again, then maybe I want to start with a cup of tea, an afternoon without rain, and a man who doesn't promise too much but stays anyway. He smiled, not in triumph, not in relief, just a quiet expression of someone who knew he had placed the first brick after the ground had once collapsed. And I, for the first time in months, felt my heart settle like the last autumn leaf touching the earth, no longer drifting, finally at rest. Snow began falling by mid-afternoon, softly and silently like every early winter before, but by nightfall the air had grown heavy and the sky darkened so suddenly it made me shiver. Strong winds pounded against the windows, carrying long, icy howls. I sat in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, one hand over my rounded belly, now in its 8th month, feeling the baby's movements stronger than usual, as if the tiny life inside sensed the unease in the storm. I didn't call Liam. He had a late meeting with an international partner. I didn't want to disturb him. I only thought I'd drink warm water and sleep early. Then the first contraction hit dull, unexpected, forcing me to grip the arm of the sofa. I thought it was from sitting too long, but before I could stand, the second wave came, harder, spreading across my back and lower abdomen. My breath hitched, my heartbeat racing, cold sweat gathering despite the freezing air outside. I bent forward, trying to breathe through it, when a warm rush of fluid spread beneath me, soaking through the fabric. I looked down, my hand trembling over my belly. No. It's too soon. 3 weeks early. But my body unmistakably knew what was happening. I was in labor. I reached for my phone, attempting to dial emergency services, but the signal was weak, the storm disrupting everything. I tried again, my voice cracking with fear, only to hear a long tone before the call dropped. With no other option, I called Liam. The call rang endlessly, my heart matching each beat with frantic anticipation. Finally he answered, breathless as though he had just rushed out of a building. "Ava, I'm here." I tried to keep my voice steady, but it broke the moment I spoke. "Liam, I think I'm in labor." Silence. Then his voice cut through the storm as if the wind outside had parted for him. "You're home, right? Don't move." "I'm coming now." I heard the slam of a car door, the engine roaring to life, then only the flat line of the call ending. I leaned against the wall as the contractions grew closer, sharper, drawing tears I couldn't hold back. The room suddenly felt enormous, every familiar object drifting away behind the fog of pain. I thought of the baby, of the first time I saw the red line on the pregnancy test, of the nights of fear, believing I would have to do it all alone. Then I thought of Liam, of the way he had looked at me in recent weeks, gentle, respectful, as if learning how to love without hurting. 17 minutes later, I heard pounding footsteps in the hallway. The door burst open and Liam rushed in, soaked in snow and rain, his face flushed with cold and worry, his eyes searching wildly until they found me on the floor, leaning against the wall, my lips pressed tight against a cry of pain. He reached me in seconds, kneeling at my side, his hands shaking but his eyes fierce. "I'm here. I won't let you be alone." I nodded, tears streaming uncontrollably. Liam called emergency services again, this time with a stable connection. While we waited, he placed his hand over my belly, pressed his forehead gently against mine, whispering words I couldn't fully hear through the rising contractions. But I felt them, felt him in every breath he shared with me. The snowstorm outside had not eased, but inside the apartment, with the distant sound of sirens finally piercing the night, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was no longer alone. Not tonight, and maybe not ever again. The wail of the ambulance siren tore through the wind, mixing with the roar of the blizzard and the rasping edge of my breathing as each contraction tightened with growing ferocity. Liam sat beside me, his hand gripping mine so tightly that both our fingers turned cold, yet neither of us let go. Every time I cried out when another wave hit, he whispered against my ear, his voice trembling but unwavering, telling me I was doing so well, telling me we would make it through this. When we reached the hospital, everything happened in a blur. Nurses pulled out the gurney. The hallway lights flashed in segments like broken pieces sliding past my eyes, and then the surgical lamps shone directly down, forcing my eyes to clamp shut. Liam stayed beside me, refusing to step away even for a breath. The doctor said it was early, but the baby was strong. We had a good chance. They weren't certain everything would go smoothly, but they were doing everything they could. I wasn't lucid enough to feel fear anymore. Every emotion inside me had dissolved into a chaotic river of pain, terror, and the faintest strand of hope. In the brief moments between contractions, I saw Liam leaning over me, sweat beading across his forehead despite the freezing storm outside. His eyes glistened, but he refused to let them fall, holding in all the months of not being able to reach me, pouring every unspoken word into this single moment. When the cry finally burst through the air sharp and high, slicing through every other sound, the world stopped. I didn't realize I was crying until Liam's hand touched my cheek. A nurse placed the tiny, wrinkled, red-skinned baby on my chest, and the warmth of that fragile body stole my breath. I looked at our child, at the tiny hand twitching weakly, the tightly shut eyes, the uneven breaths. I don't remember what I said, only that I whispered the name I had kept hidden inside me, never spoken aloud. Liam looked at me, then down at the baby, and something shattered open in his gaze, 100 shards of light, as though he had just found a missing piece of his own soul. His voice came low and steady, carrying the weight of a vow that needed no witness. "Our miracle," I sobbed, unable to hold anything in any longer. All the tearing, the hurt, the doubt, everything that had built up for far too long spilled out with those tears. Liam lowered his head and pressed a kiss to my forehead, a kiss so tender it hurt, asking for nothing, demanding nothing, offering only the presence of a man loving with every ounce of remorse in him. I didn't answer. I simply held his hand and guided it to rest on the baby's, our 3 hands touching in a moment so sacred even time seemed to pause. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but inside that small hospital room, we had our own son. A new life had begun. Not perfect, but real, and more alive than anything I had ever dared believe I could have again. The first days after the birth passed in a hazy rhythm of cries, monitor beeps, dressing changes, IV drips, and routine checkups. I was exhausted in body and spirit, unable to sleep more than an hour at a time. A fragile uncertainty crept through every quiet moment. When the baby slept on my chest, her breath light as a whisper, Liam never missed a day. He sat in the chair beside my hospital bed, cradling the baby in arms, still sore from holding me through the long labor, humming a tune without words just to keep her calm. Nurses praised him. Doctors gave him looks of sympathetic admiration, but I couldn't be that easy. I watched him with a guarded stare, as though he might walk away at any moment, as though his patience were only temporary, A performance meant for an audience of one, and I was the only one who refused to be fooled again. My heart ached for thinking it, but I couldn't stop myself. Old wounds hadn't healed, and pain doesn't vanish because of a beautiful moment in a delivery room. I let him hold the baby, feed her, change her diapers, but I never let him stay past visiting hours. I thanked him when he brought food, warm blankets, asked if I needed anything, but I quickly withdrew my gaze when I realized he was looking at me the way he did 5 years ago, the look of a man who once loved me with everything he had. I no longer knew what to do with that. One night I woke suddenly to the softest sound, a barely audible sigh. Liam sat in the corner of the room, the baby asleep in his arms, the glow from the nightlight painting the dark circles beneath his eyes. I closed mine again as if I had never stirred, though my heart churned. I saw how tired he was, how lonely, how desperately he held himself back from crossing the boundaries I'd set. But still, I didn't speak. I was afraid that if I let him step closer, I would step too, that I would believe again, love again, and if he ever turned away once more, I wouldn't survive the fall. The next morning, when I pretended to sleep, he quietly set the baby back into the bassinet, adjusted my blanket, and left without waking me. He left a small note on the table, only 2 simple sentences. I'm here, whenever you need me. No pressure, no demands. Just a reminder that he was still waiting, even as I kept my walls high. I held that note for a long time, folding it, unfolding it, as if that small piece of paper contained everything I wasn't ready to face. Love isn't always fire and blaze. Sometimes it is embers, steady and warm, reminding you that even if the storm hasn't passed, someone is standing behind you, willing to stay. But I wasn't ready to go back. Not because I didn't love him, but because I didn't know whether his love this time was truth or penance, and I had nothing left to wager ever again. A week after being discharged, I went to my follow-up appointment. The clinic this time was not the familiar one from before, but an independent maternity center known for accuracy and integrity. I didn't tell Liam. This was something I needed to do before making any other decision. The new doctor was a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor. She reviewed all the documents I brought, including the old results from the previous clinic, the tests from over a year earlier that had slammed the door on my hopes of motherhood. When she set the folder down, her eyes darkened slightly. I knew something was wrong. She asked if I was certain I had completed all those tests at the old clinic. I nodded. She was quiet for a moment, then told me in a steady voice that some of the results in the old file showed signs of manipulation. I froze. She showed me the discrepancy between 2 reproductive hormone tests taken only weeks apart, yet so drastically different it made no medical sense. One indicated I had nearly no ovulatory function left. The other showed completely normal levels. No ethical doctor would fail to order a retest in such a case, but the physician responsible for my file had not. The doctor leaned in and asked gently whether anyone from my ex-husband's family had interacted directly with the clinic. My chest tightened. Liam's mother appeared instantly in my mind, her sweetened voice, her cold, calculating eyes. She once accompanied me to an appointment when Liam had to work. I hadn't thought much of it then, but now every detail clicked together in a chilling, perfect pattern. I left the clinic with a report confirming my fertility had always been normal, and walked home in a daze. On the way, I remembered the months I cried myself empty, believing I could not conceive, the nights Liam turned his back after each failed treatment, the disappointed looks from his mother, the syrupy words that hid disdain because I couldn't fulfill the duty of a wife, and then the night he handed me the divorce papers, silent as though there was nothing left between us. I had lived in a world bent by deliberate lies. When I reached home, Liam was sitting in the living room, the baby sleeping on his chest, her tiny hand gripping his shirt as though holding on for life. He looked up, ready to speak, but stopped when he saw my face. I sat down and placed the results on the table between us. He picked them up, reading line by line. First confusion, then shock. I didn't need to explain. The look in his eyes told me he understood everything. When he looked back at me, there was anger but also pain. The pain of a man realizing he had been deceived, had lost the most important thing in his life because he believed a truth manufactured for him. I didn't cry. What I felt was no longer loss. It was relief mingled with fury because I finally had the truth, but had paid for it with years of believing I was unworthy of happiness. I stood, walked to our daughter, kissed her forehead, and said softly for Liam, and for myself, "No one has the right to take this miracle from us, no matter who they are." Liam sat unmoving for a long time after finishing the test results, his eyes still fixed on those cold printed lines as though staring a little longer might erase the years of mistakes we had lived through. I said nothing. I let the silence settle between us, not to retreat this time, but to see if he would step toward me, and he did. Not with impulsive gestures or familiar excuses, but with a heavy sigh and an unguarded look. "Ava," he began, his voice hoarse as if he had swallowed an entire storm. "If I told you I was sorry, it wouldn't be enough. If I told you I didn't know, it wouldn't undo anything. But I still need to say it, because it's the only thing I can do to begin again, if you'll let me." I turned away, not wanting him to see my eyes redden. He stepped closer, not too quickly, not too near, and knelt in front of me. He set the paper on the table and looked up at me without flinching. He told me he had believed his mother blindly, that after so many years living under her shadow, he hadn't been brave enough to question what was right and what was wrong, that when he signed the divorce papers, he thought he was choosing the path with the least pain, never realizing he was destroying the most precious thing he had. He told me about the nights after I left, when the house was so quiet that the sound of his own heartbeat felt like an indictment. He told me how it felt the first time he learned I was pregnant, how he was torn between regret and the desperate desire to make things right, but had no idea where to start. He said he wasn't asking for forgiveness. He didn't deserve it easily. He only asked to be allowed near, day by day, a little at a time, just to do right once in his life, not for himself but for our child. And for me, if one day I would allow it. I looked at him, the man who once shattered me, kneeling before me with eyes no longer belonging to the Liam of years ago, not the husband I had once loved to the point of breaking, but a man learning to rebuild with the rubble of his own mistakes. I didn't know what made my tears fall. Perhaps it was the apology without justification. Perhaps the remorse without pride. Perhaps the way he didn't beg for forgiveness but simply asked to exist beside me in whatever way I felt safe. I leaned down and touched his shoulder. He looked up, and in his eyes I saw both surprise and profound gratitude. I didn't say I forgave him. I didn't say we were starting over. I simply whispered something I never imagined I would speak again. "I believe that this time, you mean it." And with that, I felt the faintest glimmer of something like hope slipping through the clouds of memory. Not bright, not loud, but real and gentle, like someone choosing to stay until pain is no longer the border between two people. That morning the winter sun was soft, threading through bare branches and scattering delicate bands of light across the stone sidewalk. Liam texted me only one line, saying he wanted to show me something, no pressure, no rush if I felt ready. I thought for a moment and agreed. He picked me and the baby up in his car. He spoke little on the drive, only turning now and then to make sure I wasn't cold, or that the baby was still sleeping peacefully. We drove through familiar streets until we turned onto a road I hadn't visited in a long while. When the car stopped before the curved glass tower, the only one of its kind in the area, my heart thudded. Easton Green Towers, the first project bearing my name after the divorce. The building I had poured myself into to prove I was an architect on my own, a woman no longer living under anyone's shadow. I stepped out of the car and looked up at the glass, reflecting the slowly brightening sky. Those curves, those warm, neutral tones, every detail and brick felt like pieces of me. I designed it as a home for people who no longer believed in home. And now, Liam was bringing me back here. He said nothing, only opened the door and guided me into the lobby. Light spilled everywhere, from the high ceilings to the green living walls, exactly as I had once imagined. But something was different. In the private elevator, I noticed a new logo etched on the glass. Beneath Easton Green, a small line read, "A home begins with healing." I turned toward him to ask, but he only smiled. The penthouse opened into a wide, peaceful space, minimalist, warm, every detail bearing my signature, from the wood tones to the lighting to the precise placement of the large windows. Liam rested a hand lightly on my back and pointed toward a wooden crib by the window. This wasn't a model unit or a showroom. It was a home, and he had kept it for me. When I looked at him, emotion rose too quickly for words. He didn't need to speak. Everything was already written into the walls, the curves, the smallest touches. This wasn't an attempt to buy forgiveness. It was his way of speaking my language, of showing he understood who I was, and that this time, he wanted to stand beside me as I stepped into a space I had created myself. I walked toward the window, taking in the city, easing into winter. The streets below buzzed with life, yet where I stood felt startlingly calm. I closed my eyes, listening to the baby breathing softly in Liam's arms, feeling warmth spreading slowly through me. A part of me was still afraid, still hesitant, But another part was beginning to believe that some cracks don't need to be sealed, they simply need the right light to shine through. And in that moment, I understood this wasn't merely a building I designed. It was the home we never built together. But now, perhaps, we were finally starting not from the wound, but from the very place that once broke. I stood alone in the apartment while Liam took the baby out for a walk, giving me space to think, to face myself. The quiet was so deep I could hear the second hand of the wall clock ticking, reminding me that time waits for no one, and choices cannot be delayed forever. On the table lay 2 papers. One was the deed transferring ownership of this apartment to me, no conditions, no strings. The other was a handwritten letter from Liam, not long or poetic, simply honest lines saying he wasn't asking for forgiveness, only hoping for a chance to be beside me, if I wanted it. I sat on the sofa, my eyes drifting to the small wooden crib, the place where yesterday I'd stood for a long time just watching my daughter sleep. She looked like Liam, especially the way her eyebrows drew together as though contemplating something profound despite being only a few weeks old. But her eyes were mine, the wary gaze, the guardedness, as if the world had already taken something from her. And I didn't want my child to grow up with that look. I knew there were 2 roads ahead. One was leaving this city, beginning a new life with only my daughter and me. No past to unravel, no risks, no heartbreak waiting around the bend. It was safe, predictable, and profoundly lonely. The other was staying, opening myself to Liam, forgiving not because the past deserved forgiveness, but because perhaps we both deserved a chance to rebuild. But that road was uncertain, like stepping onto thin ice where a single wrong move could shatter everything. I had once believed in architecture because it could be measured, calculated, controlled. But love isn't like that. Love is imperfection, risk, sacrifice a leap without knowing if someone will catch you on the other side. I walked to the window. The city below glowed with the first lights of evening. Cars moved like rivers of time, unchangeable, unrewindable. But perhaps people can still choose where they go next. When Liam returned, carrying our daughter sleeping peacefully against his chest, his eyes held quiet worry as though he knew everything now depended on me. He didn't ask a question. He simply laid her gently in the crib and sat down to wait. I looked at him for a long time, remembering every look, every word, every fracture, every time he held me when I was falling apart. And I understood that some things would never return to their old shape. But some things, rebuilt with truth and sincerity, could become more beautiful than they ever were. I need time, I said, my voice steady. Not to forget, but to learn how to forgive. Not just you, but myself. Liam didn't speak, only nodded. And in that moment, I knew I was no longer standing between 2 futures. I was already choosing one with a courage I thought I had lost long ago. A few weeks after I said I needed time, we returned to the land in the suburbs where the community housing project I first designed was still under construction. It was an idea I had carried alongside my pregnancy, a design born for those who had once lost faith in home, like I had. But today, under the gentle sunlight of early spring, I wasn't standing there alone. Liam stood beside me, holding the first brick still warm from the kiln, while I held the trowel. He asked if I was sure. I didn't answer. I simply smiled, spread mortar across the freshly poured foundation, and set the brick down. Liam followed. Our hands brushed for a single breath, but it was enough to feel we were building something real, not a romantic new beginning, but a beginning with roots, with cracks, with a history, with reality, and with a future. I chose not to forget what happened, not to erase the lies, the hurt, the loss that once made me believe I would never rise again. But because of that, I could choose forgiveness fully. Forgiveness is not erasing, it is seeing clearly, accepting, and moving forward. I don't know what we will be in 1 year, 5 years, or 10, but I know that today, we laid our first brick for a true home, not one made only of concrete and bricks, but one made of trust. A place where our daughter won't grow up afraid, but in the resilience of 2 people who once lost each other, yet chose to return because of something larger than love. Maybe you hear this story and see yourself in it. Maybe you've been hurt, or let go too soon, or regret something deeply. But if there is one thing I've learned, it's this. Only when we face ourselves, our pain, our truth, and the failures of others can we truly heal. And sometimes healing doesn't mean becoming who you were. It means becoming someone stronger because of what broke. Thank you for listening to this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, so you can hear more stories that touch the heart every day. How did today's story make you feel? Did something in it move you or reflect a part of your own life? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We always hope to hear the voice of your heart. Goodbye, and see you in the next video. I wish all of you watching good health, happiness, and peace in each day you live. Goodbye, until next time.